Hi, everyone. The partial prophet here. Thanks for tuning in. So, I wanted to remind you that we know in part and we prophesy in part, and then when Jesus comes, we will see fully. So, today I wanted to talk about how our slavery has gotten harder. Okay, so I did a video talking about the fact that we are in the second greater Exodus. So, what's going to happen is that we're going to see a lot of the prophecies in the first Exodus story coming true in our day. Okay, so let's talk about Exodus 5 and see if you could see things that connect to our current day. Okay, so let me read Exodus 5. And afterwards Moses and Aaron came and said to Pharaoh, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go, that they may celebrate a feast to me in the wilderness." But Pharaoh said, "Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and besides, I will not let Israel go." Then they said, "The God of Hebrews has met with us. Please let us go a 3 days' journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. Otherwise he will fall upon us with pestilence or with the sword." But the king of Egypt said to them, "Moses and Aaron, why do you draw the people away from their work? Get back to your labors." Again Pharaoh said, "Look, the people of the land are now many, and you would have them cease from their labors." So the same day Pharaoh commanded the taskmasters over the people and their foremen, saying, "You are no longer to give the people straw to make brick as previously. Let them go and gather straw for themselves. But the quota of bricks which they were making previously you shall impose on them. You are not to reduce any of it. Because they are lazy, therefore they cry out, 'Let us go and sacrifice to our God.'" Okay, so in this Exodus story, we see Moses and Aaron are their leaders. Okay, so that connects to the two witnesses, which I talked about, are Trump and Netanyahu. Okay, and so then they said to Pharaoh, okay, so I wrote Arab nations in here. Actually, when I read it this time around, I was thinking that Pharaoh here would be a picture of like Obama in the left. And so what we had is that like Moses and Aaron came to the people on the left and said, let, God's people go, that they may celebrate a feast to me in the wilderness. Because what we see in Revelation 12 is that there's a prophecy about 1260 days in the wilderness, and 1260 days connects to the two witnesses. Okay. Um, Anyways, but then Pharaoh said, "Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and besides, I will not let Israel go." Okay. So I wrote that, Pharaoh could be the Iranian leader, um, where he says, "I do not know the Lord," but it, could also be, like Obama and other people on the left. Um, okay, so then they said, "The God of the Hebrews has met with us. Please let us go a 3 days' journey into the wilderness." And so Trump and Netanyahu, um, had their 3 peace deals, in the wilderness, or 5, depending on how you counted, that we may sacrifice the Lord our God. So this is interesting because I do think this statement connects to things that Trump and Netanyahu said about the peace deal. It's like, let us make these peace deals. Otherwise, you know, um, we will suffer pestilence or the sword. So otherwise, Israel will suffer invasion or missile attacks. Okay, so that was their motivation for creating these peace deals. Okay. But then it's interesting because then in verse 4 it says, "But the king of Egypt said to them, 'Moses and Aaron, why do you draw the people away from their work? Get to your labors.'" Okay, so the back was added by NASB. So it actually says, "Get to your labors." And so what's interesting is when you're reading the Bible, be aware of when God kind of switches the names, because that gives you some clues. So originally he was talking about the Pharaoh, and then he switched it to the king of Egypt. And so I'm kind of thinking that this statement here is actually a statement from God. And so then it's God saying to Trump and Netanyahu, "Why are you drawing the people away from their work? Get to your labors." Okay. Now, Trump and Netanyahu, what's interesting is that they have been flavored um, by kind of, some of the leftist thinking. And um, they um, they wanted, they didn't want to go to war, like a full-fledged war. Okay, so we didn't go to war in America while Trump was president. And Netanyahu's been kind of fighting this under the radar war. But really, with Iran being as dangerous as it is, it's necessary. It would be really necessary to fight against them because they're very dangerous. Okay. But they didn't handle Iran. And so now Israel is in a very dangerous position. Okay. So I believe that this could be a picture of God saying that Trump and Netanyahu should have fought against Iran instead of trying to make these peace deals, which, quote unquote, which aren't going to work. Okay. They're not going to protect Israel. But the other thing, too, when it says get to your labors, there we also read in the scriptures there's that concept of if you don't follow God, if you're not obedient to God, then he removes his hand of protection from you. And so that's the other labor that God could be talking about, is that God's people should have been, instead of drawing the people away from their work of worshiping God, they should have been worshiping God to look for protection rather than these quote unquote peace deals. Okay. So then it said again, Pharaoh said, look, the people of the land are many, and you would have them cease from their labors. Okay, so this could be talking about, like switching to where you have Trump talking to the Democratic governors, like some of the conspiracy theories of, okay, so during the coronavirus, this would be Trump like saying, okay, you're keeping them from working. Because remember, Trump was more interested in getting the people back to work. Okay. Um, and then there was also this conspiracy theory going around that people were using the coronavirus to get us to shut down, that they had this whole great scheme and stuff like that. And so that's what I'm thinking about that verse. So the same day Pharaoh commanded the taskmasters over the people and their foremen, saying, you are no longer to give the people straw to make brick as previously. Okay, so what's interesting is, okay, so actually, if we back up, see, this is kind of what makes prophecy complicated, is that I think God's telling multiple stories in the same verses. Okay, so I do believe there was a lot about the coronavirus in these verses. And then, so I covered that in another video. But because, prophecy really kind of can connect to what's happening in our day, I'm switching over to seeing what's happening now connected to these verses. Okay, so um, okay, so my relook at verse 5 would be Pharaoh saying, look, the people of the land are many, and you would have them cease from their labors. That would be a picture of people on the left saying to Trump, you're swaying them away from the leftist point of view. Okay, so then Pharaoh commanded the taskmasters over the people and the foremen, saying, you are no longer to give the people straw to make brick as previously. So that's what's happening right now in our day, is that the social media giants are being pressured by the left to take away social media from people on the right. Okay. So what's interesting, if you understand that straw is, okay, so we have this verse, I have it written in here, Jeremiah 23:28. The prophet who has a dream may relate his dream, but let him who has my word speak my word in truth. What does straw have in common with grain, declares the Lord? So God compares straw with grain. Grain would be a picture of God's word, and then straw would be, like um, just not as good as God's word, basically, is what I'm trying to say. And, so when they're saying that they're trying to take the straw away from the people, they're trying to take away Trump's words, which are not as good as God's words. Okay. And so it's people deciding that they won't let people hear Trump's words because they believe that that makes them want to riot. So they're concerned right now in our day and age that Trump's words are inciting a riot. And so they're trying to take away and they're not, you know, they're they're tending to have a more general sweep where let's take away all conservative talk, okay, is kind of what they're doing in our day and age, okay. um and then it says, let them go and gather straw for themselves, but the quota of bricks which they were making previously you shall impose on them. You are not to reduce any of it. So we're seeing that the conservative voices they're trying to get rid of those, but they're definitely not trying to get rid of the left voices. Okay, but what's interesting is that if you were applying the same standards, a lot of the talk that connected to BLM should be going away because that did incite a riot. Okay, but they're not being consistent. Okay, and then it says, okay, so the reason why we want to get rid of the straw is because they are lazy, therefore they cry out, let us go and sacrifice to our God. So it's interesting in the story that we have God's people are being called lazy. And so, in other words, they're being called names. Okay. And so, another term for lazy would be idle. And so that would be a picture of like the left is saying, okay, they're lazy, therefore they cry out, let us go and sacrifice to our God. Like they're they are actually racist, homophobes, etc. And so they're idle in their behavior because they have racist behavior, they have homophobic behavior, all the names that Christians have been called, on the left. Okay. So we see that in the story. Okay, so then to continue the story, let the labor be heavier on the men, and let them work at it so they will pay no attention to false words. So the taskmasters of the people and their foremen went out and spoke to the people, saying, thus says Pharaoh, I am not going to give you any straw. You go and get straw for yourselves wherever you can find it, but none of your labor will be reduced. So the people scattered through all the land of Israel to gather stubble for straw. The taskmasters pressed them, saying, complete your work quota, your daily amount, just as when you had straw. Moreover, the foremen of the sons of Israel, whom Pharaoh's taskmaster has set over them, were beaten, and were asked, why have you not completed your required amount either yesterday or today in making bricks as previously? Then the foreman of the sons of Israel came and cried out to Pharaoh, saying, why do you deal this way with your servants? There is no straw given to your servants, yet they keep saying to us, make bricks, and behold, your servants are being beaten. But it is the fault of your people. But he said, you are lazy, very lazy. Therefore you say, let us go and sacrifice to the Lord. So go now and work, for you will be given no straw, yet you must deliver the quota of bricks. The foremen of the sons of Israel saw that they were in trouble because they were told, you must not reduce your daily amount of bricks. Okay, so then it says, let the labor be heavier on the men. Okay, so just, what we're seeing is they're pushing more of the left slavery onto the people on the right, okay? And let them work at it so they'll pay no attention to false words. So they're trying to keep us away from conservative talk and trying to get us to listen to more left talk, okay? So the taskmasters of the people and their foremen went out and spoke to the people, saying, thus says Pharaoh, I am not going to give you any straw. Let you go and get straw for yourselves wherever you can find it, but none of your labor will be reduced. So the people scattered through all the land of Egypt to gather stubble for straw. So what's interesting is now we have this word stubble instead of straw, okay? And so I think stubble's even worse than straw. Like straw might have a little bit of truth in it, but stubble is just uh, completely useless. And so what I'm seeing happening is that we're seeing a rise in the conspiracy theories, because of what's going on after the Capitol riots. It's like the conspiracy theories and the militant language and everything is just accelerated. Okay, and so that's causing even more and more people to gather in the cities. Okay. um and then it says the taskmasters pressed them, saying, complete your work quota, your daily amount, just as when you had straw. Moreover, the foremen of the sons of Israel, whom Pharaoh's taskmasters had set over them, were beaten and were asked, why have you not completed your required amount either yesterday or today in making brick as previously? So what's happening now is Republicans. So it's in the story, it's talking about the foreman of the sons of Israel, which would be the Israelis, okay, the Israelites. Um, and so they started getting beaten. And so what's happening is that Republicans are getting there's a general overall increase in persecution of Republicans, Trump followers, and God's people. Okay, anyone who's not on the left. Okay, um, and because of, I mean, so now because of the Capitol riots, all of a sudden anyone who supported Trump is suspect. All of a sudden anyone on the right is suspect. Okay. And then it says, so what did I write in here? Republicans are being persecuted for not participating in overturning the election. Oh, well, so then we also have that on that side of the story where, like some of God's people that were trying to, really behave according to their conscience, when Trump was trying to overturn the election, they were getting persecuted too. So we saw, like, Pence, for example, was a big example of how he was really persecuted, because they actually said at the Capitol riots that I guess they were either trying to kill him or kidnap him or something, so he was in grave danger. Um, um, okay, so then these people were asked, why have you not completed your required amount either yesterday or today in making bricks as previously? So that would be more people on the right kind of saying, how come you're not participating with us to riot and stuff like that? I see bricks connected to rioting. That's a prophetic shadow of rioting, is what I see. Okay. Okay, the foreman of the sons of Israel came and cried out to Pharaoh, saying, why do you deal this way with your servants? There is no straw given, yet they keep saying to us, make bricks. Behold, your servants are being beaten, but it is the fault of your people. So the people on the right are realizing that, um, you know, um, some of the reasons that they're getting beaten, and persecuted is because of, the fault of people on the left. And then it says, but he said, you are lazy, very lazy. Therefore you say, let us go and sacrifice to the Lord. Anyway, so so I wrote that when I was seeing this story as a picture of, um, um, the people on the right persecuting other people on the right for not helping overturn the election. And so then, Trump was saying, you're lazy, therefore you say, let us go sacrifice to the Lord. So go now and work, for you will be given no straw, yet you must deliver the quota of bricks. But today, I'm seeing it more connected to where people on the left are persecuting, the people on the right. But what's interesting in verse 19, it says, the foremen of the sons of Israel saw that they were in trouble because they were told, you must not reduce your daily amount of bricks. So what we're seeing right now is that God's people are worried. People are seeing they're in trouble because, we're worried about rioting continuing. Okay. And so, because what we're seeing is that the people on the right, the rhetoric has been ramped up, and so there's, instead of people, learning from the Capitol riots and saying this isn't good behavior, the behavior is just escalating, and so now they like want to get even more violence to take over the land, and then especially too because they're feeling this pressure now because Trump is being impeached. So they're feeling like trapped in a corner. You know how animals in a corner get even more violence. Okay, so that's what's happening. Okay. And then it says, when they left Pharaoh's presence, they met Moses and Aaron as they were waiting for them. They said to them, "May the Lord look upon you and judge you, for you have made us odious in Pharaoh's sight and in the sight of his servants, to put a sword in their hand to kill us." Then Moses returned to the Lord and said, "O Lord, why have you brought harm to this people? Why did you ever send me? Ever since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has done harm to this people, and you have not delivered your people at all." Okay. So what we see is that people are recognizing that Moses and Aaron were the ones that made God's people, that made the Israelites odious in Pharaoh's sight and in the sight of his servants. Okay, so that Pharaoh and his servants wanted to kill kill the Israelites. Okay. So that's the original story. And so the prophetic shadow is what we're seeing, is that people are recognizing in this day and age how Trump and Netanyahu have made us odious in the sight of our enemies. Okay, so that's happening both in America and both in Israel. Okay, so in Israel right now, because of Netanyahu's behavior, Israel's enemies are really wanting to kill him, even more so. I mean, it's just been accelerating and growing. I mean, Israel's enemies feel trapped in a corner. Okay. What we had recently in the news is that Netanyahu is really trying to push through getting 800 houses built on contentious land in Israel. Some of the, it could be annexed land. But it's land that's contested, and so some of the Arab nations consider that land to be theirs. And so now the fact that Netanyahu is pushing through getting these 800 houses built there, he's making Israel even more odious, like foul smelling in the eyes of their enemies. Israel's enemies are getting more and more mad all the time, wanting to attack Israel. But also too, Trump is also making, well, what's happening too is that because Trump's time in office is about to end, Iran is also feeling that pressure because they have been planning for a while and have said this for a while, that they want to attack Israel to get back at Trump. Okay, so they're realizing the time is running short, that Trump's almost not president. And so we're seeing that happening with Israel, but then also in America, Trump has made Americans more odious in the eyes of their enemies because of the Capitol rioting, so now all of a sudden it's, people on the right, people that supported Trump, conservatives are, seen as the bad guys. Okay. And then what's interesting is I highlighted these verses. Ever since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has done harm to this people, and you have not delivered your people at all. And, so I talk about, Trump being a Moses type figure, but the Moses that, Moses ended up not being able to go into the promised land, okay, because he did not honor God, okay. And so that's what we have with Trump. Trump was not able to bring us into the promised land. And really what Trump ended up doing was made our slavery harder, not better. Okay. And that connects to in Jeremiah 28:13, there's a false prophet there who, talked about how he was going to try to remove the yokes of wood, but he ended up putting yokes of iron on them. Okay. So iron in prophecy connects to Trump. Okay. anyways, so so really our slavery has gotten harder the whole time. Um, and it's true for both Israel and America that our slavery has gotten harder during the time frame that Trump was president. Okay. So I just kind of made a list of ways our slavery are increasing in case you're not aware that our slavery is increasing. So right now in our day, we're seeing right-wing platforms are being silenced, Trump supporters are being targeted, other conservatives are being targeted. Okay, so then just with coronavirus, I don't know if you've seen, how that's, really making our slavery harder. The coronavirus rates are soaring. The hospitals are filling up. There's 2 more strains, maybe 3 more strains of coronavirus that are even more deadly, like not deadly, but more contagious. You know, and maybe there's more lockdowns because of the coronavirus. They've been under, I think this is the 3rd week of their lockdown. Okay, so they've seen their slavery increasing. And now they're actually starting to wonder if the lockdowns even do any good. And then we see with the vaccine distribution how that's really slow and fraught with difficulty. So even something we thought might give us some, freedom is really not working. And then we see people pushing to get the vaccine for blacks, convicts, teachers, rather than the elderly who really need it, the elderly with, especially the elderly with secondary conditions. And then the Republicans lost the Georgia races. So now things look kind of dire with Biden about to become president. Okay. So that's happening. And then ongoing, the coronavirus, has just been ongoing. The left wing controlling everything, that continues, and continues to accelerate. Job issues continue, weather issues. I mean, almost every day there's some major storm, either flooding or winter storms happening in some part of the world. And then up to now, BLM, the left wing has been bad, but now we're seeing the right wing extremists rising up. Okay. So all of a sudden our cities are unsafe, And so I found this verse in Psalm 139, verse 5. It says, "You hem me in behind and before, and you lay your hand upon me." Okay. So one thing to keep in mind is that God is allowing our slavery to increase. Okay. And there's good news, and we'll see. I mean, that's actually a good sign because then it means that God is about to set us free from our slavery. Okay. And so we need to read the rest of the story to find out how that happens. Okay. So in Exodus 6, it says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Now you shall see what I will do to Pharaoh, for under compulsion he will let them go, and under compulsion he will drive them out of his land.' God spoke further to Moses and said to him, 'I am the Lord, and I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as God Almighty, but by my name, Lord, I did not make myself known to them. I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land in which they are sojourn. Furthermore, I've heard the groanings of the sons of Israel because the Egyptians are holding them in bondage, and I have remembered my covenant. Say therefore to the sons of Israel, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will deliver you from their bondage. I will also redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments. Then I will take you for my people, and I will be your God, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who brought you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will bring you to the land which I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will give it to you for a possession. I am the Lord.' So Moses spoke thus to the sons of Israel, but they did not listen to Moses on account of their despondency and cruel bondage." So what's interesting is that basically what we see, okay, the Lord said to Moses, which would be a picture of like God's people. Now you shall see what I will do to Pharaoh, for under compulsion he will let them go, and under compulsion he will drive them out of his land. Okay, so the other thing to keep in mind too is that our slavery, God's people are in slavery to both people on the right and people on the left. Okay, that Trump is enslaving us as much as people on the left. Okay, and then we especially see that with, you know, like these right wing extremists and stuff. There's a lot of people that are in slavery to, you know, kind of the lies that Trump has been teaching. Um, and so it's interesting, you know, that in the story we see that Pharaoh, you know, needs to let God's people go. I see that as we also need, you know, besides we need the left to let us go, we also need Trump to let us go. Okay. And it's just been interesting that Trump has been like not conceding the election. You know, he's been hanging on to the presidency like you wouldn't believe. Okay. And so he needs to let him go. And so, you know, God is going to cause things to happen, you know, so that Trump will be forced to let God's people go. Okay. Um, and then it said, okay, so God spoke further to Moses and said to him, I am the Lord, and I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But by my name, Lord, I did not make myself known to them. I also established my covenant with them. Um, you know, so I don't know in these verses if God's speaking to the Messiah in these verses or if these are the few true prophets, okay? You know, who actually listen to God, okay? Um, you know, because I mean, right now the Messiah is not here just yet, and so maybe this is a picture of God speaking to the true prophets, okay? And remember how I said, like, in my last video I talked about the 70 prophets and that there was 68 that weren't in the camp and there was 2 prophets that were in the camp, and just how that shows the percentage of true prophets that stay in the camp with God. There's only 2 of them as opposed to the 68 that were outside of the camp. And so what's interesting in these verses is that God says, furthermore, I have heard the groaning. Okay, so I think there's some true prophets that are actually listening to God's word where God says, furthermore, I've heard the groaning of the sons of Israel because the Egyptians are holding them in bondage, and I have remembered my covenant. Okay. So this is what I wanted to really emphasize in this video, is that when we see our slavery getting harder, that's a good thing, because then God is going to hear our groaning, and then he's going to remember his covenant, and then he's going to be, you know, propelled, is that the right word, to set us free, you know. Because at some point our groanings are going to get strong enough that he's going to be prompted to move. Okay. But what's interesting is that we see in verse 9, it says, Moses spoke thus to the sons of Israel, but they did not listen to Moses on account of their despondency and cruel bondage. So it's kind of hard to speak to people that are in bondage and say, well, you know, well, God's going to set you free, you know, because, you know, you kind of get focused on your bondage, you know. Um, you know, and it's kind of interesting too because you know, like someone like me who's trying to give you the truth of what God's saying from the word, I have a really small following, you know, but then some of the other people that are really supporting the conspiracy theories, they have a really, really huge, I mean, you know, I have like, I mean, I think I only have like 32, you know, people that are subscribed, you know, but even some of the videos that I make, I only get like maybe 12 people watching them, you know, so my audience is very small, but it's just fascinating to me to look at these prophets that keep saying, and they won't let go, that Trump's going to be in office for 4 more years. It's amazing to me how huge their following is. And that kind of connects to, you know, where the vulture is, or where the corpse is, there the vultures will be, you know. So I thought that was kind of interesting. anyways, so pray harder because now your slavery has increased. Okay. And so it says, now it came about in the course of those many days that the king of Egypt died, and the sons of Israel sighed because of the bondage, and they cried out, and their cry to help because of their bondage rose up to God. Okay, so emphasis that your cry for help is going to rise up to God. Okay, that's what we need to be doing now in these days. Okay, and so I think in these verses we could see that when the king of Egypt died, that's a picture of Trump losing his presidency. Okay. And then this is just a repeat of that same verse from the previous slide. I've heard the groanings of the sons of Israel because the Egyptians are holding them in bondage. Okay. So I just wanted to make a quick point about the conspiracy theories rising. Okay, because it's just incredible. We've really seen they've gotten worse since the Capitol riots. Okay. And so I just kind of wanted to point these out to you so you could be aware. Like, if I had to tell you right now in this day and age, like who you should be listening to, who's actually preaching truth, it's very few and far between. Okay. I did like that I saw Michael Brown, who's a messianic teacher. He has a good video on like saying give it up, Trump is not Trump lost, give it up. And so I thought that was good, although I don't think he really recognizes that we're in the day and age of the Messiah coming. um you know but he did make a really good point about give it up, Trump lost. But really, if I was to tell you, what news you should listen to or where you can get, where's a good source, I would really have a hard time because a lot of people that I see on YouTube are really stuck kind of in these conspiracy theories. Okay, so it's just really prevalent. Okay, so the voice of reason, the voice of truth is like very hard to find in these days. Okay. Like I said, I think, there's like maybe, 2% or really small percent of like true prophets, whereas, the false prophets are 68% or whatever. I mean, you can't really do the prophecies that way, but, just, I mean, it probably more like 98% false prophets and 2% true false prophets. So what we see is I don't know if you've heard about QAnon, but that's where a lot of these prophecies are coming from. And just really quickly, the story about QAnon, it's an online thing. There's this guy named Q that once in a blue moon he pops on online, claims he's working inside the government and knows the truth, and says stuff about there being this deep state that was trying to overturn Trump, and that this deep state runs a pedophile ring, and that it involves people like Tom Hanks and Rita Wilson and the Clintons, and they're all pedophiles that drink the blood of children. I mean, just really bizarre stuff. What's interesting to me is that why are people listening to someone they don't even know the name of? They don't even know where he comes from. They don't even know what his motivation is. So that's just really scary that people do that. Okay. So that's where we kind of get like, and basically what we've seen with the Capitol riots is that if there's conspiracy theories going on, it can prompt evil people to just do evil things. Okay. And so these conspiracy theories, if people aren't believing the truth, they're going to do evil stuff. Okay. So I put in question marks, Biden stole the election. Okay, I'm not even really sure. Is that a conspiracy theory? Is it not a conspiracy theory? What was interesting is it was pushed a lot by Trump. I did see in the past how Trump did tend to kind of run in conspiracy theories. Like he would tend to kind of retweet some of the conspiracy theories and stuff like that. So he was always kind of on the edge. Okay. And, so, did Biden steal the election? I don't really know if that's true. Maybe it's true. To what percentage, I don't know. But what is not true is that lie that we should get militant because Biden stole the election. Okay. And that's the problem that we're having right now in our country is people believe that. Okay. There's also some really weird conspiracy theory involving, I think it's called the Dominion system, the one that tallied our votes in the election. And it's kind of weird because the countries that it puts together, I could not, like, this is what you really got to look at with conspiracy theories is like, how realistic is it? Because in this conspiracy theory, we have Italy, Iran, China, I think France is involved in it too, that they were supposedly all working together to overturn our election and that things were happening in Italy to change the votes over here. And it's just a really far fetched conspiracy theory. Okay. The thing that, like, if you understand how these countries operate, Iran and Italy would never work together. Okay. So then you could just throw out that conspiracy theory because I mean, that's just unrealistic that Iran and Italy would work together. I kind of think the reason why Italy is in this conspiracy theory is because people want to throw the Pope in, to some of these conspiracy theories because a lot of people think the Pope's the Antichrist, and so I think he ends up being thrown in with these conspiracy theories. Okay, so just don't listen to that. It's just not true. Okay, it's not even plausible. I mean, yeah, if you know how the world operates in the countries and their motivations, Iran um is not going to work with Italy. I mean, it's just not, or France. And I'm not even really sure. Like Iran and China kind of have done some things together, but if you understand that they both really want world dominance, it makes them working together, you know, kind of iffy, you know. Um, because I just don't think that's plausible. Um, and I mean, I think Iran and China kind of have their own ways of, trying to take over the world. I don't think they're, like working together. I mean, they might be able to come together on a few things, but generally they have their own plans to take over the world. Um, and then, okay, so then the lie that Pence committed treason. Okay, so this one is really important to recognize because, okay, remember in the last days that God's peoples will be targets. Okay, remember that Jesus said, your mother will turn you in, your brother will turn you in, So what we're seeing is that people on the right are persecuting other people on the right, So that's how we know we're in the last days, okay? What I personally believe is that Pence is trying hard to follow the law. Okay. But whether you want to argue with me about that or not, the bottom line is you have to be really careful who you judge and who you persecute because you do not want to find yourself fighting against God. If you end up persecuting someone who belongs to God, you will be in big trouble. Okay. So I mean, in general, we shouldn't be persecuting anyone or judging someone. We should really leave judgment up to God, which is what God says in His Word. Okay. The other conspiracy theories that I see rising or that have been around for a while is the coronavirus is a hoax, the masks don't work, people are using the coronavirus to control us, not that many people are dying. So there's a lot of conspiracy theories connected to the coronavirus. The to me the scary part is people that aren't okay. What you got to recognize is that God sent the coronavirus to judge us, to purify His people, and that if we are ignoring the coronavirus like it doesn't exist, we are fighting against God. Okay, and there's actually a verse in the prophets that talk about those people, where God's talking to His people and He says, I'm going to judge the people that did not go into exile with you. Okay, so we have this whole group of people that aren't submitting to the exile of coronavirus that God put us in. Okay. And so at some point, God's going to bring judgment on them. Okay. So you have to be really careful about that. And then, the thing about people are using the coronavirus to control us. I mean, there's some truth to that, but when it becomes this huge conspiracy theory, like they've been planning it for years, and they were actually the ones that released the coronavirus. When you start giving people way too much power, then some of these conspiracy theories start becoming, they're just like, it's just, they don't become, they're not credible, because um, a lot of times people are given way too much power. Okay. Like, what do you call it? Like, God-like powers. Okay. And I actually see that too with a lot of the things that people say about Trump. He's given godlike qualities. People believe that he has, that he's a prophet and he knows the future and he has this great plan to overturn the deep state, and um, um, all this stuff that's said about Trump. And so he's made out to be bigger than life. Okay, so you got to be really aware of things that talk about people that way. Okay, and I guess that's why, I put in the people are using the coronavirus to control us. It's making people bigger than life. Okay, and they're really keeping God out of the equation, because I mean, you have to be aware of the truth that God is the one who rises up kings and lowers the kings, okay? And so God will allow people to get power, okay? Um, you know, but only to an extent, because they're still people, okay? God is still a bigger power, okay? So make sure that you're not ascribing God-like power to people, okay? Um, a lot of theories about the vaccine saying it will change our DNA. That is a conspiracy theory. The conspiracy theory of the vaccine being the mark of the beast, or will lead to the mark. Um, okay, it is not the mark of the beast. Okay, because the mark of the beast is on your hand or your forehead, not in your arm. Um, and the other thing is, the thing that I really see about the mark of the beast is, I believe, because when you read about the mark that's given to God's people, they're sealed with God's mark. Okay. Um, I really think it's a um you know it's not an actual physical mark. Okay, because why would God, who's against tattoos, put an actual physical mark or seal on his people? And so what I really think about the mark of the beast is that it just means that God can look at these people and see that in their, like, when the mark's on their forehead, it means that they think thoughts that connect to the beast, or if the mark's on their hands, it means they do things, the work of their hands relate to the beast. Okay. um so that's what I think. And then the reverse of that would be God's people, that if they have God's seal on their forehead, it means they think about God. Okay, and then the work of their hands are connected to serving God. Okay, and what's interesting is that there's kind of a connection with the mark of the beast to the Jewish people wrap tefillin, and so there's a lot of like prophetic shadows in the tefillin connected to kind of the mark of the beast, because tefillin, you either put it on your forehead, you wrap it down your arm all the way to your hand, and so that's a whole nother teaching that we can get to, of how there's messianic pictures in the tefillin. um, and what's interesting, the tefillin is put on your forehead in between your eyes. Okay, so remember, the eyes are the two witnesses. The tefillin's in between your two eyes. Jesus is in between the eyes. Okay, Jesus is always in the middle. Okay, so that's the picture of Jesus, kind of in the middle, and there's the word of God is inside the tefillin. Okay, um, so it's got a picture of connected to Jesus, and then the one when they wrap it on their arm too, there's a lot of threes there, and that the number three connects to Jesus and his resurrection. Okay, so just really quickly, and then what I thought was interesting is that um, after the riots in the Capitol on January 6th, that I mean, almost immediately the day after, we had the prophets of God were saying that it was Antifa that stormed the Capitol. Um, Antifa would be the anti-fascist, is where that term comes from. Generally, they tend to be connected to the left type of thinking. Okay, and so basically, it was people were trying to like especially all the prophets that are saying, well, Trump's supposed to come back for 4 years. It was like immediately people were trying to protect themselves and what they've been saying. And, so they started making up other conspiracy theories to go against the lies that they've already been teaching. And, so Antifa started getting blamed instead of Trump's people. Okay. And I thought that was dangerous because I thought we should have used um, the Capitol riots to really rethink um, our thoughts about Trump. Is Trump really a good guy? Is Trump really on God's side like everyone claims? I don't think he is, and I've talked about him in some of my videos. Um, you know, so so I thought that was sad that immediately people were trying to protect themselves, and you know, um, but just kind of interesting how the conspiracy theories have just been getting worse. Okay. We saw that also with the George Floyd protests that started in May, that there was on the media, it was just nonstop where they just kept talking about peaceful protests. And it was really, they were trying to hide on the left, the rioting that really happened um, during that time. Okay, that was a huge conspiracy theory and lie. Okay. Um, so what's interesting too is that I wrote, okay, Obama was not born in America. I put a question mark. I mean, who knows? I don't know. I don't really know what the truth is, but it was interesting because that was really our first introduction to Trump and how he tended to kind of, kind of be on the edge, and kind of like ran, you know, um, he was involved in kind of conspiracy theories. And I mean, I think that's why people were kind of drawn to him because he was one of the few people that stood up to Obama. Um, so, anyways, but who really knows what the truth is? And it actually, the thing about that I thought was interesting is that to me it wasn't as important where Obama was born as to the fact that if you actually look at his belief system and his mentors, to me that gave him more, like, to me that gave more reason why he shouldn't be president, because he was a very far right, I mean far left, um, I mean a militant left, Marxist. His mentors were very Marxist. You know, and so we would have been better off in this country if that was focused on rather than whether he was born in America or not. Um, so, anyways, so that was kind of interesting. Um, so what we see in the Bible about the story of the original Exodus, we're going to see a repeat of, the things that happened. And so when Israel was in the wilderness with Moses, remember that there were various groups that rose up against their leadership. Okay, there was various people in the wilderness um, that rose up against Moses and Aaron. Okay, I mean, there's like maybe at least three different stories, that were pretty prominent of people rising up against Moses and Aaron. And so really what we saw is this rebellious spirit with the Israelites. Okay. And so we see that happening now. Okay. People don't want to, people don't want to wear a mask. People don't want to be shut down. People don't, um, People don't want Biden to be president, and so just that spirit of rebellion. Okay. Um, and then there was definitely a lot of murmuring and complaining in the wilderness. Okay, that's happening now. A lot of murmuring and complaining. Okay, they built a golden calf in the wilderness. Okay, I see that with Trump, that he's, you know, um, the there's been kind of this pseudo Christianity connected to Trump, which would be a type of golden calf. But also a type of golden calf on the left too. Okay. And then, one of the biggest problems that God had with the Israelites in the wilderness is they didn't have faith. They didn't trust God to take care of them. They didn't trust that God could feed them, all that kind of stuff. And so we see that happening with the Capitol riots, is these people that do not have faith to take care of us if Biden becomes president. Okay. And so then what's happening is they're having to take matters into their own hand and try to overthrow the government or whatever their motivation is. Okay. Um, but that's just not good behavior. Okay. And God chided them so much for not having enough faith in the wilderness. Okay, because let's read what he says about the people in the wilderness in Hebrews. Okay, so this is actually from the New Testament, but God's looking back at the people in the wilderness with Moses. Okay, so it says, therefore, just as the Holy Spirit says, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as when they provoked me, as in the day of trial in the wilderness, where your fathers tried me by testing me and saw my works for 40 years. Therefore I was angry with this generation and said, they always go astray in their heart, and they did not know my ways. As I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. Take care, brethren, that there not be in any one of you an evil, unbelieving heart that falls away from the living God, but encourage one another day after day, as long as it is still called today, so that none of you will be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. For we have become partakers of Christ, if we hold fast the beginning of our assurance firm until the end. While it is said, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as when they provoked me. For who provoked him when they had heard? Indeed, did not all those who came out of Egypt led by Moses? And with whom was he angry for 40 years? Was it not those who sinned, whose bodies fell in the wilderness? And to whom did he swear they would not enter his rest, but to those who were disobedient? So we see that they were not able to enter because of unbelief. Okay, it's very powerful prophecy for our day. Okay. So God said they provoked me as in the day of trial. Okay, do you not believe that God has us in a time of trial? Okay, how are we going to behave when Trump doesn't get reelected and Biden gets reelected? Are we going to continue to have faith in God to take care of us, or are we going to try to take matters into our own hand? Okay, and then God says, your fathers tried me by testing me, and saw my works for 40 years. Okay, so for 40 years, this country has been falling away from God, but God is taking care of his people. Okay. And then, so God says, therefore I was angry with this generation and said, they always go astray in their heart, and they did not know my ways. As I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. Okay, so what God's saying is that he's going to bring rest with the Messiah, and there's this whole group of people. Remember, the road is narrow, and few are those that are able to get in. Okay. So what we're gonna see is a lot of Americans, a lot of Christians, or a lot of people that claim to be Christians are not going to enter into God's rest when Jesus comes. Okay, because they provoked God. They didn't have faith, in the wilderness. And remember, the wilderness connects to the two witnesses. Were in God's people were in the wilderness for the same time during the two witnesses. So it's a repeat of history. Okay. So make sure you don't have an evil, unbelieving heart that falls away from the living God. Okay. Today, if you hear God's voice, do not harden your hearts. Okay. When you see, um, the trials that God is putting us under, don't harden your hearts. Okay. Submit to God's purifying judgments. Okay. Um, and like I said, really, God's calling us when things are getting harder, we're just supposed to pray harder. Okay. Do our best and pray harder. Okay. Keep that faith, because what does he say? Hang on, you know, hold fast, until the end. Hold fast with your assurance, until the end. What does it say? We have become partakers of Christ if we hold fast the beginning of our assurance firm until the end. Okay, so all through these 40 years, are we hanging on to our faith in Jesus? Okay, and in God. Okay. Okay, so I was kind of talk about the wilderness with Moses. We kind of have that time frame of 40 years. So here in America, we've had a generation of people. So 40 years kind of connects to a generation time frame. So we've had a generation of people who were raised without prayer, raised without the Ten Commandments, raised either with no religion or watered down religion. The leftist agenda was taught in schools, colleges, television, movies, music. It's also been why we've kind of had this watered down religion. The leftist ideas have filtered into the church. Okay. I've seen this that rebellious and militant spirit that we saw in the 60s was passed on to the next generation. Okay. That is why we're struggling now, why we have people basically rioting in the streets, because there's this rebellious and militant spirit, okay, that we first saw come out in the 60s, and then it got passed on to the next generation. Part of the problem too is we've had social media with its various conspiracy theories, so they're able to just run rampant because of social media. So there could be a good debate whether social media is a good thing or not. We've had false prophets, are part of the problem, okay, that have been, kind of influenced by the leftist agenda. We also had 8 years of Obama, followed by 4 years of Trump. I saw Christianity turned into the political cult of Trump during the time of Trump. There's could be a whole nother teaching of, what kind of happened to America during the time of Obama too. And then I wrote, Trump was also raised in America, so he also learned the ways of the left. He's a watered down conservative. It's interesting that, he got picked to represent the Republicans because he's really not a true Republican. I mean, it's kind of interesting because Trump people, they kind of call out what they call rhinos Republican in name only. Well, really, Trump is a Republican in name only. So thought that was kind of interesting. So if we're kind of wondering why things are happening, this is why. You take religion out of the school, or you water down the religion, um, you know, then you get people rioting in your cities. Okay. Oh, and also that the rebellious spirit too is just the whole thing of not respecting your parents, not respecting authority. Okay. So I also wanted to talk about, there's a prophetic shadows with Trump and John the Immerser. Okay, John the Baptist. The reason why I call him John the Immerser is that I think there's supposed to be kind of a prophetic shadow of John being connected to the waters. Okay. John says, I baptized you with water, but he will baptize you with the Holy Spirit. So what I think the prophetic shadows, what I believe is that John has a lot of prophetic shadows that connect to Trump, and that, obviously Jesus connects to the Messiah. Okay. And so John baptized with water, but Jesus will baptize you with the Holy Spirit. So what we saw is that during the time of Trump, he was really pulling people God's people away from Jesus and drawing them into the waters of Trump. Um, or I mean, the Jordan River, I think, connects to Trump. Okay. Um, prophetic shadows. But, I kind of have that picture about the Sea of Trump and the Sea of Obama. Okay. And that God's people are in the dry land with Messiah in the middle. Okay. Um, and then, okay, so it says, behold, I send my messenger ahead of you who will prepare your way. Okay, the voice of one crying in the wilderness. Remember, I talked about the two witnesses. The time frame of that is the time of in the wilderness. Okay, so that connects to Trump. Okay, and so really, Trump was sent to prepare us for the coming of the Messiah. Okay, and really, kind of a testing to divide God's people. How well were we going to do for the testing? Were we going to continue to hold on to our faith, or were we going to become rebellious and start rioting in the capital and the cities? Okay. Okay, so then it talks about all the country of Judea was going out to him and all the people of Jerusalem, and they were all being baptized him in the Jordan River. Look at this description of, I mean, some of the description of John the Baptist doesn't connect to Trump. But what's interesting is the description of John the Baptist in verse 6, which is interesting that that's verse 6, because 6, I think, is a number that connects to Trump. It said John was clothed with camel's hair. Okay, can you picture Trump wearing a camel hair's coat? Don't rich people wear camel hair's coat? And then it says he had a leather belt around his waist. Okay, and so I think that connects to, Obama is the belly of the beast. And so, kind of during the time of Trump, Obama was, kind of tied up. Okay. And then Trump's diet was locust and wild honey. Okay, so locust would be a picture of his followers, that end up rioting in the cities. Okay, and the wild honey would connect to where the word of God is compared to like honey. And so, Jesus has like the true honey, and then Trump's word would be connected to like wild honey. Okay, maybe sometimes it kind of sounds like the word of God, but it's just wild. Okay, and it was interesting too because the protest on January 6th, Trump called it the wild protest. So I thought that was interesting. So I didn't get them all in here, but let's see. I was going to look at my notes that I had a few more things that connected Trump to John. Okay, so it says, when you went out to see John, what did you go out to see? This is from Matthew 11:8. It says, a man dressed in soft clothing in king's palaces. So I thought that connected to Trump, because that would be different than, like the Messiah who, really lived a life of sacrifice rather than this rich, privileged life that Trump lived. Okay, so let's see. The sun will be darkened. Okay, so then we read too about a reed shaken by the wind connected to John. Okay, and so what I think that it would be a picture of would be like the east wind kind of influencing Trump. I think the east wind could be a connection to the left. Let's see. Okay, and so did you go out to see a prophet? Yes, more than a prophet. Okay, so what's interesting about that is with Trump, okay, so people went out to see Trump and they made him more than a prophet. Okay, they made him out to be a Messiah. Okay, a Messiah type. Okay, and so that's what I see with Trump. And so John the Baptist was considered a messenger. And so we see with Trump, he's going to have the last trump, that's going to usher in the Messiah. And then what's interesting about John the Baptist, it says this has always kind of puzzled people because it talked about John the Baptist. It says, among those born of women, there is not arisen anyone greater than John the Baptist, but that the one least in the kingdom is greater than he. And so you get kind of this concept like, well, so maybe John didn't get saved, which, would kind of be hard to believe, the original John. But if that's a prophetic shadow of like Trump, you could see, it makes more sense that you see that it's kind of this prophecy about Trump. Okay. And, so Trump was kind of put in this prominent position. But anyone that ends up entering the kingdom with Jesus is going to be greater than Trump. Okay. It was interesting. I think it was Tucker Carlson talked about how, why is there all this focus on President Trump? And, I thought that was kind of interesting. And I think that has a lot to do with that, well, first of all, because he's, supposed to be ushering in the Messiah, but also too, that, because it is a very good question to ask. Why is there all this focus on Trump? And I do think it has a lot to do with that people have either made him out to be this great messianic type figure, or they made him out to be almost like the Antichrist. Okay. I mean, it's just interesting because people either love him or they hate him. Okay. So just very interesting. And then we also see in Matthew 11:12, it says, the kingdom of heaven suffers violence. Violent men take it by force. Okay. And so that happened during the time of John the Baptist. But we also see that during the time of Trump. During Trump's turn, is that, the kingdom of heaven was suffering violence. We were seeing violence in America during Trump's term. And then what's interesting, John came neither eating nor drinking. The two witnesses are considered to be fasting with sackcloth. I kind of think when it says John neither eating nor drinking, that maybe connects to Trump not really like taking the bread and the body of Christ. Okay. What's interesting too is we see Herodias's daughter wanting the head of John the Baptist. Okay. So I connect that to Nancy Pelosi. Do we not see that people want the head of Trump, on a platter? Okay. And, so we shouldn't be surprised. We're following prophecy right along because John ended up in prison when the Messiah came. And whether Trump actually ends up in a physical prison or, we've just seen that he's been impeached, he doesn't have to really end up in a physical prison for prophecy to become true. It could be, just kind of a expression, so he's, it's like he's in prison because he's been impeached. Okay. Let's see. Okay. I already said most of the stuff. Let's see if there's anything new. Okay, so Herod had John arrested. So I talked about this before too, that, we shouldn't be surprised that we see like Biden kind of rising up into power, because remember when Jesus was born, Herod was, the king. Okay, so there is going to be an evil person in power when Jesus comes. Okay. And then, okay, so what's interesting is we saw, okay, so this is in Matthew 14. We saw John the Baptist was telling Herod that it was not lawful for him to have Herodias, his brother's wife. Okay, that could be a prophetic shadow of Trump saying that Biden stole the election. Okay, and so that's why Herod had a problem with John the Baptist, because he kept telling him he was doing bad stuff. Okay. And so we see that with Biden, that he would not be happy with Trump because Trump's saying he's still the election. Anyways, so and then we see at some point that John gets beheaded in prison. Okay, so definitely interesting. So it'd be interesting to see how these prophecies play out. Okay, and then also too, what we see when Jesus hears that John gets beheaded, he withdraws from them in a boat to a secluded place. Okay, so I think the boat could be a picture of the ark. Like the Ark of Noah, you know. So we'll have to see how that plays out, because I do think when Jesus comes that he kind of he comes for a short time and says that America is going to be judged, and then he leaves. And there's a lot of prophecies about him leaving in a boat. So I think there could be an ark type picture when Jesus leaves. Okay. So that's some of the connections I see with Trump and John the Immerser. So the good news is if Trump is connected to John the Immerser, what can we expect to see next? We can expect to see the Messiah. So it's all good news, okay? This is stuff I covered in my last video, so I just go over it quickly. The great city was split into 3 parts. Okay, it was 3 Kings Day when the riots happened. And so I think that's really true, that America is being split into 3 parts, and God was using the riots really to cause God's people to let go of, their, hanging on to Trump and putting all their expectations and hope into Trump and saying, maybe he's not that good of a guy. I need to just focus on Jesus. And, so I do think God was using that. God, before he set the Israelites free in Egypt, he judged their gods. Okay, so the God of Trump was being judged. Okay, and so hopefully if you're a follower of Jesus, you let go of your strong grip on Trump. Okay. Okay, so the wicked will act wickedly in the end time. That's definitely what we're seeing. The violent ones among your people will also lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision, in order to rebel, but they will fall down. Okay, so that connects to the rebellion that we see in the wilderness. Okay, remember I said there's twins in the wound. Okay, so what we're seeing rise up is the militant on the left, the militant on the right. It's similar behavior. It's still rioting in the city. Okay. So then, so what we see about the 6th hour, darkness fell over the whole land until the 9th hour. Okay, and the veil of the temple was torn in two. Okay, this is all coming true right now. It says, so this is from Genesis. It says, I will put enmity between you and the woman. And so that would be the serpent and the woman. So Obama's people hate the harlot. Okay, remember I said people either love Trump or they hate him. Okay, and so we see kind of this rising up between Obama / Biden's peeps versus Trump's peeps. Okay, and I think God's going to use that to bring judgment. It says, he shall bruise you on the head. So Trump bruised Obama and his people for a season, but then they will bruise him on the heel. Okay, they keep him from walking as president. Okay. These are the verses that talk about the 70 false prophets. Okay, I want to talk about the verses in Revelation where it says, I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon and out of the mouth of the beast and out of the mouth of the false prophet 3 unclean spirits like frogs. For they are spirits of demons performing signs which go out to the kings of the whole world to gather them together for the war of the great day of God the Almighty. So I see, okay, so remember that one of the, and this was actually early on, one of the early plagues was frogs, okay? And what's interesting about the frogs is that they get gathered up in heaps and they start smelling, okay? And so I think we're seeing some of that right now. We're seeing a fulfillment of some of that in prophecy, where we're seeing that the people that participated in the riots are now being arrested, okay? And the fact that there's people getting arrested, it's causing this foul old odor to come on to the conservatives and onto the right. Okay, it's making God's people odious to God's enemies. Okay, um, and so that's what we're seeing. The frogs are rising up. Um, and so, but by your endurance, okay, so these verses are very, very, very important. Okay, Luke 21, it says, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that her desolation is near. Okay, so what are we seeing? We're seeing the National Guard troops in Washington, D.C. Okay, what's interesting is that they said there was more, um, there's more military people in Washington D.C. than there is in the whole Middle East. So I thought that was very interesting. Um, but in Luke 21 it says, by your endurance you will gain your lives, by your long suffering. Okay, so hang in there, um, you know, endure, keep your faith in God. Um, and then so then it goes on to say, those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Okay, so I've kind of looked at those more closely today. And so don't read my notes in red. Because what I want to say about those who are in Judea, that would connect to the people that are connected to Jesus. Okay, must flee to the mountains. Okay, so we read in the Psalms that, we look up to the mountains because where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord. So I think there might be a connection to that. Okay, and then it also says those who are in the country, okay, those who are in the midst of the city must leave. Okay. All right, I wrote Trump is in the midst of the city and is refusing to leave. But also, remember I talked about like Jesus and his people are always kind of in the midst. Okay, we're hemmed in, on both sides from the right and the left. Okay, and we're in the midst. Okay. And so God says, if you're in the midst of the city, then leave the city. Okay. So definitely, and the city could also be a picture of the Babylon too. If you're in the midst of Babylon, you want to leave Babylon and follow Jesus. And then, I'm sorry, I'm trying to find my notes. Because, okay, so there's also connection with these verses to when Rahab the harlot hid the two spies, okay? And because it says she brought him up to the roof and hid the two spies in the stalks of flax. And the stalks of flax were laid out in order on the roof. Okay, so we see kind of a picture of the Sukkot booth. Okay, and so I've talked about, we want to be in a booth to be protected. Okay, that's going to bring us protection when we're in a booth with Jesus. Okay, and so we want to be hidden in the stalks of flax on the roof of our booth, and that's what's going to protect us during this rioting. Okay, we want to be hidden. Okay, but we're not supposed to leave our booth. Okay, and then also Rahab tells the two spies to go to the hill country and hide for 3 days. Okay, so I think this connects to the 3 days of darkness. I don't know if the riot was 1 day and then we just have 2 more days of rioting to come, or if there's actually going to be 3 more days. I'm not really sure. But we're supposed to, when it says go to the hill country, we're supposed to go up and hide. Hills are always a picture of the Messiah, or mountains. We're supposed to go up and hide. Okay, so hide in Yeshua, hide in Jesus. Okay, so those are those verses. So it says Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So we're going, so basically the climax of the time of the Gentiles is going to be riots, apparently. Okay, and then that's going to be the end of the age of the Gentiles, and then the time when the Messiah will come. Okay, so if we see, and that's what's happening, we're seeing kind of this buildup of potential riots. And so we shouldn't be surprised because God prophesied that was going to happen. Okay. And then it says forces from him will arise, desecrate the sanctuary fortress, and do away with the regular sacrifice. So we saw that on January 6th is they stopped the ceremony of the electoral vote. So what's interesting is that the riots at the Capitol happened on January 6th. Remember, 6 connects to Trump. And then Biden got sworn, whatever, the electoral vote happened on the 7th. So I thought that was very interesting. Because I think in the statue of Daniel and some of my previous videos, I had Biden being the 7th person, and then the 8th person. So the 6th king was Trump, and the 7th one is Biden, and then the 8th connects to the Messiah and also connects to the Antichrist. Okay, Obama. Okay, so so it's been prophesied that there'd be a time of Biden, and I think he's just supposed to come for a short amount of time. Okay. Um okay, so then it says by smooth words he will turn. Okay, so it says and they will set up the abomination of desolation. That's what's happening right now is they're setting up this abomination of getting ready to riot. Okay. And then by smooth words, he will turn to godlessness those who act wickedly toward the covenant, but the people who know their God will display strength and take action, or not take action, but be obedient to God. Okay. Um, because I don't want you to think that God's people are the ones that are going to be rioting. We need to just be obedient, display strength, and be obedient to God. Okay. Who says, submit to your authorities and all that kind of stuff. So what's interesting is that we see, I think this is a picture of Trump, by his smooth words, he will turn to godlessness. Okay. We kind of have this concept of like slipperiness, that Trump might not be saying things directly, but because his words are slippery, it's causing people to turn to godlessness. Okay. And what's interesting too is that we see kind of with these militant on the right, they're sort of reading between the lines of what Trump says and hearing things that he's not really saying. And so that would be that deluding influence that God has put on these people. Okay. You know, I mean, I don't know if you ever saw Last Man Standing, but he had a conspiracy guy on there. And the conspiracy guy was all about, like, he thought Michael Baxter was, putting hidden codes in his blogs. Okay. So that's what happens with these conspiracy theory people, is that they could see hidden messages. They could see things that are being said that aren't really being said because they're so stuck in their delusion. Okay. And so these, people are delusional to think that Trump is calling them to riot. Okay. Um, anyways. Okay. And so then he says, they will fall by sword, by flame, by captivity, and plunder for days. Okay. I wrote 1 week or longer because I didn't know if it was like kind of a week time frame between the Capitol riots. Maybe it's a little bit longer, but this weekend is really kind of looking to be a possible, the 17th. I'm really looking at that date because it connects to when the Great Flood happened in the story of Noah. We got that 17 number. Okay. But also it talks about the ark resting on the 17th. Okay, so the ark would be a picture of God's people. They're resting while the riots are going on. Okay. So what's interesting, the rooster crowing twice. I think the rooster crowing twice could be a picture of, there's so many different things it could connect to, but now I'm seeing it's a connection to Trump being impeached for the second time. Okay, so in between Trump's 2 impeachments was when Trump did his quote unquote peace deals. Okay, what's interesting is that 120 days after 9/15, okay, so on September 15th, 2020 was when Trump had his peace deal signings in Washington, D.C., and then 120 days later was Trump's impeachment. Okay, so So actually, on the 13th of January was actually 121 days. Okay, but remember that God says to Trump, or says, sorry, says in the story of Noah, he says, the people are wicked, I'm only going to give them 120 years. And so I think what, God is doing is that he's only giving Trump 120 days. And so then on the 121st day, Trump loses power. Okay. But what also we see with the 21 that connects to 777, which I talked about in my last video, which is when um, the father of Noah dies at the age of 777. Okay, so we're seeing Trump loses power on the 121st day. Okay, very significant. Okay, and so I want to talk about, okay, so there were 70 weeks to finish the transgression. I'm wondering if that's 70 days. Okay, because the 15th of January was the 70th day of Biden. Okay, so the dates, what we see is 7 weeks after 11/7, which was when they declared Biden the winner, was December 25th was Christmas. So I think God's doing something with Christmas, okay? And then 62 days after 11/7 was January 7th. That's when they had the electoral college vote, so kind of officially Biden, became president on that day. What's interesting is that was January 7th, which was the Orthodox Christmas. Okay. We saw that in Daniel 5 that Darius the Mede receives the kingdom at about the age of 62. See prophecy being fulfilled, because remember how they called Trump was Cyrus the Persian, and so now Biden is Darius the Mede. Okay. 70 days after 11/7 is January 15th. What's interesting about today, or January 15th, is also the 1 year anniversary of the deal of the century on the Hebrew calendar. Okay, so very interesting. So then, God says, 70 weeks, which I think connects to the 70 days, have been decreed to finish the transgression to make an end of sin. And so, has God been allowing these 70 days to, usher in the finishing of this transgression, this building up of the abomination of desolation, where now they're ready to riot? That's what I'm wondering. Okay. I didn't know if there was a 1 week time frame from 1/7 to 1/13. So 1/6 was when we had the riots. 1/7, maybe there was this 1 week time frame in the middle of the week they put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. That was when they, on 1/10 was the middle of that week, was when Pelosi announced the impeachment. What's interesting is we have another week time frame, 1/15 to 1/21, which connects to Passover. Okay, it's Passover is always the first of the month on the 15th. In the middle of that week is 1/18, which I thought was very interesting because that's the Armenian Christmas Eve. Okay, so does Jesus end up coming on the third Christmas? That is my question. Okay, and so then when Jesus comes, does he end up... Okay, so Biden's people put an end to sacrifice and grain offering, like put an end to Trump in the middle of their week, but then is Jesus going to come and is he also going to put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering in a better way, in a greater way? So key dates, I already talked about this, but let's look here. What's interesting is that you have, like, after the deal of the century, there was a 7 week time frame and a 120 time frame, 120 day time frame, and then we see kind of that repeated with now there's a 7 week time frame after Christmas, and then I meant to put in, let's see, I didn't put in the 120 days. Yeah, because like I said the 120 days ended on January 12th. Okay. So January 13th, when Trump was impeached, was 121 days. Okay. So I didn't put that in there. I really meant for this chart to be a comparison about how we had 7 weeks and 120 day time frame before, at the beginning of the coronavirus shutdown, and now we're seeing a repeat of a 7 week time frame and 120 day time frame. So just so you know that we see God kind of using these numbers and repeating the numbers. But I think we could see that maybe there's like kind of a what do you call it? Uh, I can't think. A chiastic structure maybe kind of coming out. I'm not really sure. I would have to do a lot of charting to find out. Um, um, but we are seeing kind of this repeat in history because Trump's first, like first um, impeachment happened in December and January, right before the deal of the century. And then, like, what we're seeing is kind of like maybe at the end of Trump's time, is we're seeing a repeat of that um, impeachment, So, very interesting. Very, very interesting. Um, okay, so this is the verse where it talks about, okay, because you have said the Lord is raised up. Okay, wait, should I read the whole thing? I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and I will restore your fortunes and gather you from all the nations and from all the places where I've driven you, and I will bring you back to the place from where I sent you into exile. Because you have said the Lord has raised up prophets for us in Babylon. For thus says the Lord concerning the king who sits on the throne of David, and concerning all the people who dwell in the city, your brothers who did not go with you into exile. Behold, I am sending upon them the sword, famine, pestilence, and I will make them like split open figs that cannot be eaten due to rottenness. I will pursue them with the sword, with famine, with pestilence, and I make them a terror to all the kingdoms of the earth, to be a curse, a horror, and a hissing, and a reproach among all the nations where I've driven them, because they have not listened to my words, declares the Lord, which I sent to them again and again by my servants the prophets, but you did not listen, declares the Lord. Okay, so what's interesting is that we see God talks about the king who sits on the throne of David. Okay, so I think that could be a picture of Trump who's acting like a Messiah. Okay, he's sitting on David's throne saying, I am, a messianic figure. Okay, and then there's a connection with him to all the people who dwell in the city, your brothers who did not go with you into exile. Okay, they did not accept the exile that God was trying to put us under, and instead, they continued to whatever, party, go to bars, go to church without masks. Right now they're acting like we're in like Trump's a good guy, and I can't remember if I talked about this when I was talking about conspiracy theories, because one of the things that they've been talking about is the false prophets are saying that Trump is supposed to stay in power for 4 more years, and then he's supposed to be ushering in, or like somehow we need him so that revival will come. Okay, and so that's a conspiracy theory because, well, like my husband talks about, why do we need Trump for revival? That God's people always had revival during hard times. Okay, so see how there's a flaw in that thinking that we need Trump for revival. And then there's also no picture of the Messiah in that conspiracy theory too, or whatever. But we have all these people who did not go with us into exile that are, acting like we're not in exile and that we already have our Messiah. Okay. And so what does God say about those people? He's going to send upon them sword, famine, pestilence. Okay. So very interesting. I mean, really what I think is the militant on the left are going to rise up against the militant on the right, and we're going to see riots, and that's how God's going to bring judgment to the two sides. Um, so here's that picture of the Sea of Obama on one side, the Sea of Trump on the other. Um, there's the dry land with the Messiah, no lies in the middle. Okay, as the sea split, the hidden world came to light. So right now you don't see God's people; they're like hidden. Um, and you know, like um, but as God divides the sea, He's going to He's going to reveal His people. Okay. And I wanted to bring out this verse because this was very important. This comes from Zechariah 14. Okay, so in Zechariah 14, he says, I'm going to gather all the nations to Jerusalem to battle. The city will be captured, the houses plundered, the women ravished. Okay. The women ravished is the connection to the Dinah story when Dinah gets raped. Okay. So Dinah being raped is connected to the Capitol riots. Okay. Um, it'd be a picture of America, kind of being uh raped. Okay, and then so then God said, "Flee as you fled." This is still in Zechariah 14. Flee as you fled before the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. What's interesting is that we read about Uzziah that he became proud and he entered the temple of the Lord to burn incense. Okay, so which would be a picture of he kind of went into okay, you're not supposed to go into the temple of the Lord unless you're God's anointed one. Okay, so Uzziah went in to burn incense. Okay, so um there's an emphasis on that word burn. Okay, um but basically we have this king Uzziah is acting like a priest when he's not a priest. Okay, so that's a picture of Trump. And then what happens with Uzziah is leprosy breaks out on his forehead. Okay, so we see his story in Second Chronicles 26. So the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah, would be the earthquake that happens because, he's trying to act like a priest when he's not a priest. Okay. Um, and then it talks about the Mount of Olives being split into, split in the middle, and then you have like the north side and the south side. So that's a connection to the Civil War. Okay, so that's where we're gonna repeat kind of like a lot of the Civil War. So like the militant on the right and the militant on the left are gonna be kind of like the north and the south of the Civil War. And then God talks about the hand of one lifted against the hand of the other. I mean, it's interesting because these prophecies came true during the time of the Civil War. But then we're going to see a repeat of that in our country. So, anyways, so I'm not really sure. The 16th, we saw Uzziah became king when he was 16. Could connect to January 16th, but we also definitely see in Genesis 7:11 we see the great flood, the fountains of the great deep burst open, and that's on the second month, the 17th day. What's interesting, it says 600 year of Noah's life and then the second month. So that could connect to that 62 where Darius the Mede becomes king at 62, and then we have the 17th day, which could connect to January 17th. Okay. And then, like I said, the ark rest also on the 17th. Okay. And so that would be God's people resting while this great flood is happening, which would be the rioting. So that's a lot of information, but hopefully, I hope you can be encouraged, because you could see God's plan for his people. Even though things look dark and dire, it's about God bringing judgment to his enemies, and then preparing us for the coming of the Messiah. So we might still have 2 or 3 more really dark days before Messiah shows up. But remember, it's always darkest before the dawn, okay? And that remember when we see Jerusalem surrounded by armies and the abomination of desolation, set up, remember that we're going to see that Messiah is right at the door, okay? And that our redemption draws nigh, okay? So remember that. And so that, remember that even though our slavery has gotten harder, that's what needs to happen, um, so that, God will be prompted when he hears our cries to move and set us free from our slavery. Okay, so it's all encouraging. Okay, so hang in there, have faith. You know, um, you know, trust in the Messiah. Look up, for your redemption draws nigh. Look up to the mountains where your help comes from. Keep your faith in God, endure till the end. Um, so be encouraged. I know it's hard. Hang in there. Okay. If you feel like you're under slavery, that's a good thing. You're on you're on the good side of history. Um, so that's my video for today. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. So hang in there. The Messiah is right at the door. Okay. Okay. So thanks so much for listening. Be blessed.